If you've ever watched a mixed martial arts fight or a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu match, you've probably seen it happen. One moment, both athletes are battling for position. A few seconds later, one slips behind the other, wraps an arm around the neck, and the fight is over. It often looks almost effortless, which leads many people to the same conclusion. The attacker must simply be stronger. But that's one of the biggest misconceptions about the rear naked choke. In reality, this submission isn't designed to overpower someone through brute force. In fact, many successful rear naked chokes are finished by athletes who aren't physically stronger than the person they're choking. The secret lies somewhere else entirely. What makes this technique so dangerous is that it doesn't begin with the neck. Long before the choking arm tightens, the defender has already started losing something far more valuable than strength: options. Every small movement available to escape is gradually taken away until the body is left with very few effective choices. That's why experienced grapplers rarely think of the rear naked choke as just a submission. They see it as the final step of a process that started much earlier, often before the audience even realizes a choke is developing. So if the neck isn't where the real battle begins, where does the rear naked choke actually become so difficult to escape? The answer begins with one of the most dominant positions in all of grappling: back control. Whether it's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or MMA, elite athletes spend enormous amounts of energy trying to reach an opponent's back, not because the choke is immediately available, but because the position itself quietly removes the defender's ability to fight back. Think about how your body naturally generates power. Most of it comes from your hips, your shoulders, and your ability to turn toward whatever is threatening you. Back control disrupts all three. With hooks around the legs or a body triangle locking the torso, the attacker follows almost every movement the defender makes. Instead of chasing, they stay connected. That connection is what makes the position so frustrating to escape. Every attempt to twist, roll, or bridge often carries the attacker with it, leaving the defender expending energy without creating meaningful space. Even the hands become occupied, forced to protect the neck instead of helping regain position. This is why experienced grapplers often say the rear naked choke is won before it's applied. By the time the choking arm starts sliding into place, the defender is already reacting rather than controlling the exchange. But if controlling the body is only the setup, what actually happens inside the neck that can end the fight so quickly? This is where one of the biggest misconceptions about the rear naked choke appears. Many people assume the technique works by crushing the windpipe and making it impossible to breathe. While that can happen if the choke is poorly positioned, that's usually not what skilled grapplers are trying to achieve. A properly applied rear naked choke is primarily a vascular choke. Instead of focusing on the airway, the attack compresses the carotid arteries that run along both sides of the neck. These arteries carry oxygen-rich blood to the brain. When blood flow is significantly reduced, the brain receives less oxygen than it needs to function normally. That's why the technique can work surprisingly quickly. It isn't the lungs running out of air that causes the submission. It's the brain recognizing that something is wrong. At first, a defender may feel mounting pressure or dizziness. If the choke remains in place, consciousness can be lost within seconds. This also explains why technique consistently beats force. The goal isn't to squeeze as hard as possible. It's to place the forearm, biceps, and shoulder in exactly the right positions, so pressure is directed where it matters most. A well-placed choke often feels tighter than a much stronger but poorly positioned one. But if the body can be affected so quickly, why do some people still escape while others have no chance at all? The difference often comes down to timing. The easiest rear naked choke to escape is usually the one that hasn't been fully locked in yet. Once the attacker has completed the structure of the choke, the defender's options shrink dramatically. That's why experienced grapplers don't wait until they feel the pressure around their neck. They begin defending much earlier. One of the highest priorities is hand fighting, controlling or peeling away the attacker's choking arm before it settles into its final position. At the same time, small adjustments like lowering the chin, rotating the shoulders, or creating even a few centimeters of space can interrupt the sequence before it becomes airtight. These movements may look insignificant to a casual viewer, but at the highest level, they're often the difference between escaping and tapping. Elite competitors understand that submissions are rarely decided by one explosive movement. They're decided by dozens of tiny positional battles that happen beforehand. By the time a rear naked choke is fully secured, those earlier opportunities have usually disappeared. The fight isn't being lost in that final squeeze. It's being lost in the seconds leading up to it. So if elite fighters understand all of this, why do they still get caught by the same submission over and over again? At first, it seems like a contradiction. The best fighters in the world spend countless hours defending the rear naked choke. They know exactly how it works, they recognize the danger early, and they train against it every week. Yet it continues to be one of the highest percentage submissions in professional competition. The reason is that elite grapplers aren't usually defeated by the choke itself. They're defeated by everything that came before it. A successful rear naked choke is often the reward for winning a series of smaller battles. Fatigue slows reactions. A failed escape exposes the back. Defending one grip creates another opening. Every correct decision by the attacker quietly limits the defender's next option, until protecting the neck becomes almost impossible. This is why high-level athletes rarely chase the choke from the beginning. They focus on controlling position, forcing mistakes, and patiently building toward a moment when the defender has too few choices left. By then, the submission feels almost inevitable, not because it's unstoppable, but because the conditions have been carefully created. If that's the pattern behind this technique, what bigger lesson does it reveal about how elite combat actually works? The rear naked choke is often remembered as one of the most effective submissions in combat sports. But its real lesson has very little to do with choking someone. It reveals a principle that appears throughout Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, judo, and even striking exchanges. The best techniques don't succeed because they generate the most force. They succeed because they remove the opponent's ability to make effective decisions. By the time a rear naked choke is applied correctly, the defender isn't simply trapped by an arm around the neck. Their posture has been broken, their movement restricted, their escape routes reduced, and their attention divided between multiple threats. The choke is simply the final consequence of all those advantages coming together. That's why experienced grapplers often describe submissions as the end of a chain, rather than the beginning of one. The finish is only possible because the position has already done most of the work. Once you understand that, the rear naked choke looks completely different. It stops being a display of strength and becomes a demonstration of biomechanics, leverage, timing, anatomy, and positional control working together. And that's why, even after decades of evolution in combat sports, it remains one of the hardest techniques in the world to escape.